So we have just checked on what is it that we need to remember when we present a vocabulary. We have discussed a couple of golden rules. And what I'm going to show you now are some examples of what I call remote tasks, considering the presentation, in this case, of vocabulary. So if you pay attention, in these remote tasks, I'm asking students to watch a video, and I am providing them with the link. This video can very easily be accessed by cell phone or a tablet or computer, of course. And the idea is that by watching this video, students have the possibility to learn or revise daily actions. So in the video, they will be presented with some actions that we perform every day. They are very clearly explained and contextualized, and the video is short. And right after that, students will have to divide the activities presented in the video, and they will have to divide them according to whether they happen in the morning, at midday, in the afternoon, or in the evening. So they are being presented with a new vocabulary through a video, and then they are classifying the activities according to the moment of the day in which they happen. There's another example that I wanted to show you here. I'm also presenting students with new vocabulary through a short video. In these new times that we are undergoing, I have found that there are lots of very short and simple videos for little kids, for teenagers, for older students. There's a little bit of everything for students of all ages. You have to take the pains of actually checking on the video to see if it is suitable. And right after the video that students watched, in which they were presented with vocabulary related to celebrations, then I gave students the possibility to read some passages where some festivals or special occasions are being described, and using the vocabulary that they were presented in the video, they have to guess. So for example, in the first one it says, for this special occasion, families get together, they decorate a tree, they exchange gifts, and children write letters to Santa Claus, and students have to write the celebration being referred to is Christmas. So I am presenting the vocabulary through a video, and I am also using a text to reinforce the presentation of vocabulary. For younger students, there are other examples that I wanted to share with you. As I mentioned before, the more visual the presentation of the vocabulary, the better it is. So here, students are being presented with vocabulary related to animals. And there's this other remote task in which students are presented with positional language, and they are learning the prepositions of place. And we are using a ball and a box just to make very clear what each of the prepositions of place refers to. And then there's this other example of a remote task in which I'm giving students, it has to do with things that you can do for entertainment. So they've got a chart divided into what and where, and they've got art exhibition, a rock concert, an orchestra play, a match, and then they have to decide or to choose from a list provided where would be the places where you would be able to see, for example, a pop concert. All right. Another example that I wanted to share with all of you has to do with, again, students will be watching a short video where they will be presented with vocabulary related to hobbies and free time activities. The advantage of using these videos, as I mentioned before, is that the presentation is really colorful, short, to the point, and students will have the possibility to listen to the pronunciation of the new words. So after watching this video where they are presented with hobbies and free time activities, then they will have to classify the words in the video according to whether they are hobbies or sports, and if they happen to be summer, spring, autumn, or winter activities. I'm going to make reference to this afterwards when we talk about presentation of grammar, but you've got there a very clear example of how I integrate vocabulary to grammar, because right after the presentation of vocabulary related to hobbies and sports and free time activities, I will be introducing the structure like plus ing, so that students can say, in spring I like playing football outside, etc. We will be checking on this in depth in Module 3, how we start integrating all the stages of the lesson, but this is an example for you to check on. So we've seen a couple of the golden rules when it comes to presenting vocabulary, and we are going to move on to the presentation of grammar. And we will also be exploring a couple of golden rules that we need to bear in mind. These golden rules, I call them golden rules because they work in face-to-face lessons, and they must also I these remote tasks. I am not very much in favor of explaining grammar straight away. I like a little bit more engaging students in discovering the grammar, and I think this works when you have your class with you, but it also works remotely, okay? So as I mentioned there in the PowerPoint, it's helpful to have students discover the grammar rather than telling them straight away. You can always contextualize grammar. It is fundamental that you do. And you can present grammar through a text or a listening or a video where the target grammar is being used in a very clear context. We will be checking on some examples of this later on. You can present or explain or get students or guide students in the discovery of grammar through the use of pictures or drawings in order to illustrate grammar points. Remember that many students are very visual, so getting to illustrate the use of grammar is really very helpful. We're going to check on a couple of examples later on as well. More grammar presentation techniques that you might take into consideration, which work both in face-to-face contexts and remotely. Drawing timelines, for example, when you're teaching tenses, this is really very important. Sometimes this question of time and tenses is so abstract that a very good way of making it a little bit more concrete and visual is by using timelines. You can use tables, all right. There's nothing against tables. Many people are against tables, but when I say tables, I'm talking about the affirmative, the negative, he, she, it, you, those tables that you would usually and still find in many course books. There's nothing against tables. The wrong thing to do is to go straight with a table with no context having taken place before. We will be checking on this in depth later on. You can use objects, of course, to present the meaning of grammar. So I was thinking of, for example, having to teach comparatives and superlatives, and you can bring objects, for example, to the classroom to actually say that something is bigger than or smaller than or taller than. Usually working with a real thing there is quite relevant. In the case of remote tasks, you can very well use photographs or illustrations or pictures. Something that helps a lot is also contrasting structures to show the difference in meaning, okay? So for example, if you're teaching the difference between the simple past and the present perfect, you want to use different examples to really show the difference in use as well as structure. You might use different sentences and ask questions like, which is the sentence that shows that an action was finished in the past? All these techniques really, really help, okay? As I mentioned before, and it's used quite a lot, and it works for the classroom and in remote instances as well. You can use the target grammar being part of text or in part of a listening conversation, or you can very well build up or provide students with a situation in which the target grammar is being used. Let me share with you a couple of examples. So in a remote task that I designed for students related to vocabulary with jobs and the world of work, students had to read what different people were saying about their jobs. So for example, Louis says, "I really hate my job. It is boring and low paid. I wish I could get another job." Alison says, "I was unemployed for a long time and it was really stressful. Now I have an interesting job." Naomi says, "I am going to apply for a new job. I read a very good job advertisement in the newspaper yesterday." Olivia says, "I feel motivated because there is a possibility that I get a new position." And Lance says, "I like my job. I have a lot of responsibilities, but I am well paid. I can't complain." So the idea is that we're introducing words related to the world of work in a clear context, people talking about their jobs. And as you can see, we used this to actually introduce the target grammar, which is reported speech. So what did they say? What did these people say about their jobs? Well, Lewis said that he really hated his job. So the idea is that we are transforming direct speech into indirect speech, and we are highlighting actually what we want students to pay attention to. This is what we mean by presenting grammar in context and making grammar part of a situation. And of course, after making students notice the new structure in examples that are not examples coming from nowhere, but are examples that they are already familiar with because they come directly from a reading activity that has just taken place. Now we move on to typical grammar table, but as you can see, we do not have isolated examples which are meaningless for our students. We are actually using the very same examples we were analyzing before. So we are telling that we use reported speech to say what somebody else said, and we are presenting students with the tense changes through very clear examples. So this would be the way I would present grammar in a regular lesson. Since this is not taking place because students are at home, this is the kind of grammar presentation that we are supposed to give students, which is very scaffolded and runs smoothly from one thing to the other. And if you pay attention, right before explaining reported speech, there was an instance in which we were presenting vocabulary related to the world of work, and all that was integrated in reading. So integrating the skills is really very important, and we are going to take a look at that in Module 3. And these are other techniques that you can use to present grammar, which really, really work. This is what I was mentioning before as for using timelines. When it comes to tenses, it's really very useful. So using timelines, using charts, using like arrows to indicate what happened before, all that really makes something so abstract quite concrete. You can compare structures like, for example, I went to Italy in 1998, I've been to Italy, to show students that we change the tense if we are not saying when and we're just referring to the experience. And this is what, of course, we cannot bring real elephants and giraffes and hippos, etc. But using, using flashcards, or for example, if you want to compare and contrast, you can do it with your students in class. But if you don't have that possibility, using pictures, using photographs will really make it meaningful for students. All right.